The letter was cold to the touch, the paper thick and unforgiving. But it was the words, printed in a stark, bold font, that froze the blood in my veins. Notice of public auction. And below it, my address, our address. The house my parents had built, the home where I had cared for them in their final years, the only place my heart felt at peace. It was being put up for auction in 30 days. My breath caught in my throat. I sank onto the antique bench in my hallway, the letter trembling in my hand. How could this be happening? Then I saw the signature at the bottom of the page, a crisp, arrogant scrawl I knew better than my own. David, my brother, the treasurer of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. A wave of nausea washed over me as the pieces clicked into place. The endless, nonsensical fines, the certified letters, his smug, pitying tone on the phone last week when he'd said, "Caroline, the rules are the rules. If you can't afford to live here, maybe you should sell." He hadn't just been harassing me. He had been building a case, manufacturing a debt, all to orchestrate this, to steal our family home from under me. In that moment of pure, devastating shock, a cold, familiar calm began to settle over me. It was the feeling I used to get right before I cracked a difficult case. David had made a fatal error. In his greedy rush to seize my home, he had forgotten what I did for a living for 35 years. He had forgotten that his older sister was a retired forensic auditor. And he had forgotten about the small, meticulously organized file I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk, a file labeled simply, David's Creative Accounting. If you believe that family should be a sanctuary, not a battlefield, then do me a favor. Let me know which city you're watching from in the comments. Subscribe to the channel and buckle up, because this is the story of how my brother tried to auction off my life and how I used his own crimes to foreclose on his future. Our parents' will was a source of quiet contention. I, as the older sibling and the one who had moved back home to be their full-time caregiver for a decade, inherited the family house. David, who had been busy racking up debt with a series of failed business ventures, inherited a substantial sum of money, an amount equal to the home's value at the time. It was perfectly fair, but in David's eyes, it was a betrayal. He believed the money was fleeting, but the house, our beautiful, sprawling colonial, was a permanent symbol of status. He never forgave me for it. He spent his inheritance in less than 5 years on a flashy lifestyle he couldn't sustain. When the money ran out, the resentment remained, simmering just beneath the surface of our strained family gatherings. His only real success was getting himself elected as the HOA treasurer. It was a volunteer position, but for a man starved of respect, the title was everything. He loved the small measure of power it gave him, the ability to enforce rules and levy fines. I, on the other hand, had retired. After a long career as a forensic auditor for one of the top accounting firms in the country, I was ready for peace. My job had been to hunt for the lie hidden in the numbers, to follow the ghost trails of money through complex spreadsheets, and to expose fraud and embezzlement. I was very, very good at it. I could smell a cooked book from a mile away. I had always worried about David's ethics. Even as kids, he was always looking for an angle, a shortcut. When he became HOA treasurer, I had a quiet, sinking feeling. Out of a morbid professional curiosity, I started paying close attention to the HOA's annual financial statements, and what I saw were red flags everywhere. Inflated landscaping costs from a vendor I'd never heard of, vague consulting fees, a pattern of rounding and estimations that just didn't feel right. So I started my own private file. It was a habit from my old job. I quietly collected data, cross-referencing public contracts and vendor registrations. It was a small academic exercise, something to keep my mind sharp. I never thought I would actually have to use it. Then, about 6 months ago, David's campaign against me began. It started with a $200 fine for my mailbox being 1 inch out of vertical alignment, then a $500 fine for unapproved perennial color variations in my flower beds. The violations were absurd, but the letters were official, stamped with the HOA's authority and signed with my brother's flourish. I tried to talk to him. "David, this is ridiculous," I said over the phone. "You know these are nonsense. Rules are rules, Caroline," he'd replied, his voice dripping with false authority. "No exceptions. If you want to dispute it, You can file an appeal with the board. He knew the board was stacked with his cronies, and any appeal would be dead on arrival. Week after week, the fines escalated. He began adding late fees, interest charges, and administrative penalties. I refused to pay, and the fabricated debt began to swell, growing from hundreds to thousands, then tens of thousands. I knew what he was doing. He was creating a paper trail, building a mountain of fake debt so high that he could use it as a weapon. The final blow before the auction notice was the lien. A lien is a legal claim against a property for an unpaid debt. With his manufactured debt now exceeding $50,000, David had the HOA's lawyers place a formal lien on my home. It was a shocking act of aggression, a move designed to make it impossible for me to sell or refinance, to trap me completely. I was his prisoner, and the walls of my own home had become my cage. That was when I knew he wouldn't stop until he had everything. The auction notice was not the beginning of his attack. It was the final, brutal execution. He thought he had me cornered, that I was just his aging sister, a helpless widow who didn't understand the complex rules he was using against her. He had forgotten that I wasn't just his sister. I was the auditor, and the audit of David's entire life was about to begin. The auction notice was a declaration of war, and it transformed my grief and shock into a cold, diamond-hard fury. The date was set for 30 days from now, a 30-day countdown to my own financial and personal ruin. David had left me no room for negotiation, no path for appeal. He had pushed me to the edge of a cliff, expecting me to fall. He was about to find out that I could fly. That night, after the initial wave of panic subsided, the forensic auditor in me took complete control. I went to my office and pulled out the file. David's creative accounting. For the past year, it had been a morbid hobby. Now, it was my salvation. I spread the contents across my desk. The HOA's inflated financial reports, my private notes on suspicious transactions, and the corporate registration documents for the HOA's primary landscaping vendor, Green Valley Solutions. I had discovered months ago that Green Valley Solutions was a shell company. It had no physical address, no employees, and no equipment. Its registered agent and sole officer was a woman named Deborah Smith, a name so common it was almost a joke. But what I had that no one else did was a piece of information from years ago. Deborah Smith was the maiden name of David's wife. He had been subcontracting the HOA's landscaping work to a local crew for a fraction of the price, then invoicing the HOA through his wife's shell company for the full inflated amount. He was embezzling, siphoning off thousands of dollars of our neighbors' money every single month. My file was a meticulous record of this fraud. I had copies of the cash checks from the HOA to Green Valley, and I had bank statements from the real, much cheaper landscaping company. The difference between the two was his profit. It was a simple, classic, and profoundly illegal scheme. But a criminal investigation would take months, even years. The auction was in 30 days. The police couldn't stop a civil action like an HOA foreclosure. I needed leverage, and I needed it now. The file wasn't just proof of a crime. It was a weapon of mutually assured destruction. The next morning, I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Frank. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. "Frank," I said, my voice steady, "my brother has manufactured a debt and is trying to force a foreclosure auction on my house. I need to stop it." "That's a tough situation, Caroline," he said. "We can file for an injunction, but we'll need a strong case to convince a judge to intervene in an HOA matter on such short notice." "Oh, I have a strong case," I replied, "and it has nothing to do with the fines. I need you to arrange a meeting for me, not with my brother, with the president of the HOA, Mr. Caldwell, and I want the HOA's legal counsel to be there. Just the three of us. Tell them it's regarding a matter of urgent fiduciary malfeasance that could bankrupt the entire association." The legal jargon was a language they would understand. Fiduciary malfeasance are magic words that make board members break out in a cold sweat. It threatens them not just with a lawsuit, but with personal liability. Frank made the call, and the urgency in his tone got their attention. The meeting was set for the following afternoon. I spent the rest of the day preparing. I didn't copy the entire file. That would be showing my whole hand. I selected 3 key documents. The first was the corporate filing for Green Valley Solutions, showing David's wife as the owner. The second was a copy of a single massive invoice from Green Valley to the HOA for emergency tree removal, an invoice for $20,000. The third was a copy of the actual bill from the real tree removal service for that same job. The cost? $4,000. The single transaction showed a fraudulent profit of $16,000. It was undeniable, easy to understand, and utterly damning. I walked into the meeting the next day, feeling a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. Mr. Caldwell, the HOA president, was a retired executive, a man who valued order and reputation above all else. He looked annoyed, clearly seeing this as a distraction. The HOA's lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, looked bored. Mrs. Sterling, Caldwell began, your lawyer said this was urgent. We have the foreclosure auction of your property on the books. If this is an attempt to appeal that, this has nothing to do with my property, Mr. Caldwell, I interrupted, my voice firm. This has to do with yours, or rather, with the financial solvency of the association you are sworn to protect. I slid the 3 pieces of paper across the polished mahogany table. I believe you'll find these documents illuminating. I watched as the 2 men picked up the papers. I saw their eyes scan the first page, then the second. I saw the lawyer's bored expression vanish, replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. I saw Mr. Caldwell's face go from annoyed to confused to a pale, sickly white. He looked at the $16,000 discrepancy between the 2 invoices. He looked at the name on the shell company's registration. He looked at me. This, he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. This is... That, I said, leaning forward, is a single transaction. I have a file in a secure location that documents dozens more going back 2 years. It's a pattern of systematic embezzlement orchestrated by your treasurer, my brother David. I calculate he has stolen over $100,000 from this community. The lawyer immediately understood the implications. This is a criminal matter, he said, his voice tense. It is, I agreed. And I fully intend to hand my entire file over to the district attorney's office. But the criminal case is slow. My more immediate problem is the auction of my home in 28 days, an auction orchestrated by the very man who has been robbing you blind. So, here is what is going to happen. I looked directly at Mr. Caldwell. You are going to call an emergency executive session of the board tonight. You are going to cancel the auction. You are going to void the lien on my property and erase every single fraudulent fine my brother has levied against me. And you are going to demand his immediate resignation. If all of that is done by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, my file remains private for now. If it is not, that file will be on the DA's desk by noon and on the desk of every local news reporter by 5 p.m. And your board will be facing a massive lawsuit from every resident in this community for gross negligence. Am I clear? The 2 men were silent, stunned. They were caught in a trap they never saw coming. The board lawyer was now looking at the biggest legal disaster of his career. The proud president was looking at the ruin of his community's reputation. I had them. My brother thought he was foreclosing on my house. He had no idea that I was about to foreclose on his entire life. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Mr. Caldwell's heavy, panicked breathing. He stared at the documents on the table as if they were venomous snakes, a tangible representation of the institutional poison that had been flowing right under his nose. The HOA's lawyer, a man accustomed to being the predator, now looked like prey. He was frantically, silently calculating the legal fallout, the lawsuits, the insurance claims, the reputational damage. It was a checkmate, and he knew it. You'll have your answer by 9 a.m., the lawyer said, his voice a tight, strained whisper. He didn't even look at Caldwell for confirmation. He knew there was no other possible move. I gathered my 3 pieces of paper, placed them neatly back in my folder, and stood up. I'll be waiting for your call, I said, and walked out of the room without another word. I didn't need to threaten or bluster. The cold, hard numbers on those pages had done all the talking for me. That night must have been the longest night of my brother's life. I can only imagine the panicked phone call he received from Caldwell, the summons to a hastily called emergency meeting. I picture him walking into that meeting, arrogant and self-assured, expecting to be praised for finally ridding the community of his problematic sister. And then, the trap door opening beneath him. I picture Caldwell sliding those same 3 pieces of paper across the table. I picture the blood draining from David's face as he saw his wife's maiden name, his fraudulent invoices, his entire criminal enterprise laid bare. The argument, I was told later, was not about his guilt. That was undeniable. The argument was about survival, the board's survival. They pressured him, threatened him, and made it clear that he was being cast out to save the ship. He could either resign quietly and pray that I would keep my end of the bargain, or they would personally escort him to the police station themselves. The call came at 8:45 a.m. the next morning. It was Mr. Caldwell. His voice was humbled, stripped of its usual executive bluster. "Mrs. Sterling," he said, "the auction has been cancelled. The lien against your property has been voided. All outstanding fines have been erased from your account. We have received and accepted Mr. David Sterling's resignation from his position as treasurer and from the board, effective immediately." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," I said, allowing a hint of ice to remain in my voice. "I trust this concludes the matter." "Yes," he said quickly. "And on behalf of the board, I want to offer our most sincere apologies." "Your apology is noted," I interrupted, "but it is not accepted. Not yet. You and your board were grossly negligent. You allowed a thief to manage your finances and a bully to run your committees. My silence is conditional not just on David's resignation, but on a complete and total reform of this association. We will be discussing that at the next general meeting." I hung up. My house was safe. The immediate threat was gone. But I wasn't finished. I had stopped the execution, but the man who had ordered it was still walking free. His resignation was a small victory, but it wasn't justice. Justice, I knew, would have to be far more personal. David, in his panic, did the one thing I expected him to do. He ran. He packed a bag, told his wife he was going on a business trip, and disappeared. He was a coward, hoping the storm would blow over. He didn't answer my calls. He didn't answer Chloe's. He left his wife, Deborah, to face the fallout alone, and the fallout was significant. News of the treasurer's abrupt resignation for personal reasons spread through the neighborhood, but without the full story, it was just gossip. That was about to change. I waited a week, letting the silence and the uncertainty eat away at them. Then I made my next move. I didn't go after David directly. I went after his greatest vulnerability, the enabler and beneficiary of his crimes, his wife, Deborah. I drove to their house, a grotesquely oversized McMansion in the neighboring, even more exclusive subdivision. I wasn't carrying a file this time. I was carrying a single piece of paper, a legally drafted promissory note. Deborah answered the door. She looked pale and frightened, a woman abandoned by her captain on a sinking ship. "What do you want, Caroline?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I want to talk about restitution," I said, walking past her into the marble-floored foyer. "David has stolen over $100,000 from my neighbors, money that was supposed to be used for our community's upkeep. That money is going to be paid back, all of it." "We don't have that kind of money," she cried. "David's business is failing. We're leveraged to the hilt." "I'm aware," I said coldly. "I've reviewed your financials. That's why I'm here. I am offering you a choice." I placed the promissory note on her ridiculously ornate console table. "This is an agreement. It stipulates that you and David will repay the full amount, $105,000, to the Willow Creek HOA. You will do so by signing over the title to your second property, the lake house." Her jaw dropped. The lake house was her pride and joy, her symbol of social status, the place she hosted lavish summer parties. "If you sign this," I continued, "and if David returns, cooperates with the full audit, and publicly apologizes to the community, my file on his embezzlement will remain sealed. The DA will not be involved. The newspapers will not be informed. You will lose the lake house, but you will not lose your freedom or your standing in this town. If you do not sign, I will consider my deal with the HOA board null and void. I will release the file. David will be arrested for felony embezzlement. You will be named as an accessory. Your shell company, Green Valley Solutions, will be at the center of a very public, very ugly criminal investigation." She stared at the document, her mind reeling. I was offering her a way to contain the damage, to trade an asset for her anonymity and freedom. You have until 5 o'clock to get your husband on the phone and have him agree to these terms, I said, walking towards the door. If I don't hear from your lawyer by then, I will make my next call to the district attorney. I had given my brother a choice, prison or poverty. Now, I was giving his wife the same choice. I had them cornered, their entire future resting on a single signature. The house of cards they had built with stolen money was about to come crashing down. The call from their lawyer came at 4:59 p.m., 1 minute before my deadline. He sounded exhausted. "They've agreed to your terms, Caroline," he said. "David is on his way back. He will cooperate. They will sign over the title to the lake house." I had won. The victory was absolute, but the quiet, clinical satisfaction I expected to feel was absent. Instead, there was just a cold, hollow emptiness. This was my brother, and I had just orchestrated his complete and total ruin. There was no joy in it, only a grim, necessary finality. The next few weeks were a flurry of legal activity. David returned, looking like a shell of his former self. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the shuffling, downcast gait of a defeated man. He met with the HOA board and their lawyers, and under my watchful eye, he confessed to everything. The full audit I conducted revealed the theft was even worse than I had estimated. $121,000 over 2 years. The transfer of the lake house deed was the first major step in the restitution. The property was valued at nearly $500,000. The HOA, under my guidance, put it on the market immediately. The proceeds from the sale would be used to first repay the stolen funds in full, and then to create a new, protected reserve fund for the community. A fund that I would personally help design the oversight for. The neighbors I had protected were not only made whole, their community was now more financially secure than ever before. The final piece of his humiliation was the public apology. The general meeting was held in the community clubhouse, the same room where he had once presided as treasurer. This time, he stood at the podium not as a leader, but as a confessed criminal. The room was packed, a silent, grim jury of the neighbors he had stolen from. He read from a prepared statement, his voice a low, unsteady monotone. He confessed to the embezzlement, to the fraudulent invoices, to the betrayal of their trust. And then, he turned to the last part of the statement, the part I had insisted be included. He looked up from his paper, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. "Finally," he said, his voice cracking, "I need to make a personal apology. My actions were not just financial. They were driven by a personal and malicious vendetta against my own sister, Caroline Sterling. I used my position on this board to harass her, to manufacture debt against her, and to illegally attempt to foreclose on our family home. My actions were born of jealousy and greed, and they were inexcusable. I have brought shame upon myself, upon this community, and upon the memory of our parents." He finished and just stood there, a broken man under the harsh fluorescent lights. There was no applause, no jeers, just a heavy, profound silence. He had been stripped of everything, his title, his stolen wealth, his reputation, and finally, his pride. After the meeting, as people were quietly filing out, he approached me. "Caroline," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "is it over?" I looked at my brother, at the wreckage he had made of his life. The anger I had felt was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. "The public part is over, David," I said. "The community has been repaid. The house is safe. But what you did to us, to our family, I don't know if that's something that can ever be over." In the months that followed, David and Deborah became ghosts in their own lives. They had to sell their oversized house to cover the remaining debts and the crushing legal fees. They moved into a small, rented townhouse on the other side of the city. The social circles that had once fawned over them now shunned them completely. They were disgraced, isolated, and for the first time in their lives, truly poor. I, on the other hand, found myself reluctantly pulled back into a position of leadership. The HOA board, shaken to its core and desperate for trustworthy guidance, asked me to step in as an interim treasurer to oversee the financial reforms. I agreed on one condition, that my tenure would be temporary and that we would establish a new system of checks and balances so that this could never happen again. I spent the next year rebuilding the HOA's finances from the ground up. I implemented a system of transparent, dual-signature approvals for all payments. I put all major contracts out for competitive bidding. I created a citizens' oversight committee to review the books quarterly. I was, in essence, doing for the entire community what I had once done for a living. I was cleaning up the mess left by a man who thought he could outsmart the numbers. The work was fulfilling in a way I hadn't expected. I wasn't just a resident anymore. I was a guardian, a protector of my neighbors. The same skills I had once used to hunt down corporate criminals, I now used to ensure the community garden had enough funding and that the pool was properly maintained. But every time I balanced a spreadsheet or signed a check for the HOA, a shadow of my brother lingered. I had won. I had protected my home and delivered an inescapable justice. But the cost had been immense. I had been forced to destroy my own brother to save myself. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the final entry in the audit of our family's history would be written not in black ink, but in red. The year I spent as the interim treasurer of Willow Creek was a year of meticulous reconstruction, both for the community's finances and for my own sense of purpose. The cold, analytical skills that had defined my professional life were now being used to cultivate something I never expected: a community. I found a quiet satisfaction in the work, in restoring order not for profit, but for peace of mind, my neighbors and my own. The gaping hole that David's betrayal had torn in the fabric of our association was slowly, painstakingly, being rewoven with threads of transparency and trust. David and his wife Deborah faded from view, becoming cautionary tales whispered at neighborhood barbecues. They had lost everything they valued: their status, their circle of friends, and their ill-gotten wealth. I heard through a distant cousin that David was working a menial sales job, struggling to make ends meet. He had tried to steal a home built on a foundation of love and memory, and in return, he was left with nothing but the empty shell of a life built on a foundation of greed. There was no pity in my heart for him, only a profound and heavy sadness for the brother he could have been. My life, however, began to expand in ways I had not anticipated. Having a public role in the HOA, even a temporary one, forced me out of the quiet solitude I had retreated into after my parents' passing. I got to know my neighbors not as names on a directory, but as people. I learned about their children, their careers, their passions. The woman who had been seen as a quiet, private widow was now seen as a competent, trustworthy leader. One of the first projects I greenlit with the newly recovered funds was the renovation of the community clubhouse, a project David had repeatedly vetoed, likely because it would have diverted funds from his embezzlement scheme. As we planned the renovation, a younger board member, a graphic designer named Sarah, made a suggestion. "We have that empty wall in the main hall," she said. "What if we created a historical mural? Something to honor the history of this land, the original families." Her eyes met mine across the boardroom table, and I knew what she was really suggesting. It was a quiet, respectful acknowledgement of my family's deep roots in this place, a gesture of gratitude. I was deeply touched. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said. I opened our old family albums to Sarah, sharing stories and photographs of my parents, of the old farmhouse that once stood where the clubhouse now was, of the sprawling orchards that had once covered these streets. The project became a beautiful collaboration, a bridge between the past and the present. As my one-year term as treasurer came to an end, the board held a small ceremony at the newly renovated clubhouse to thank me for my service. The centerpiece of the event was the unveiling of the new mural. It was a beautiful collage of old photographs and painted scenes, depicting the history of Willow Creek from its agricultural past to its suburban present. And there, in a place of honor, was a beautiful, hand-painted portrait of my parents, their smiling faces looking out over the community they had unknowingly founded. Beneath the portrait was a small bronze plaque. It read, "In honor of the Sterling family, whose roots run deep in Willow Creek, this clubhouse stands on the land they first called home." Tears welled in my eyes. It was a gesture of respect so profound, so deeply healing, that it felt like the final, definitive closing of the wound David's actions had opened. He had tried to erase me from our home. In response, the community had chosen to permanently etch our family's legacy into its very heart. After the ceremony, as I was preparing to leave, Mr. Caldwell, the president, approached me. He looked humbled and years older than he had on the day of our tense meeting. "Caroline," he said, his voice quiet, "I never properly thanked you. You didn't just save our finances, you saved this community from itself. You could have destroyed us with that information. You could have gone to the press, started a firestorm, but you chose to handle it with a difficult, painful grace. You forced us to clean our own house. We owe you a debt of gratitude." "We all make mistakes, Bill," I said. "The measure of a person or a community is in how we fix them." I walked home that night under a clear, star-filled sky. The air was crisp, and the neighborhood was quiet. As I approached my house, the house that was still mine, still safe, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The file on David's crimes was still in my desk drawer, but its power was gone. It was no longer a weapon, but a sad, dusty artifact of a war that was finally, truly over. My revenge had not been a single, fiery act of destruction. It had been a slow, methodical process of reconstruction. I had torn down the corrupt system my brother had built, and in its place, I had helped to build something stronger, better, and more honest. The house was safe, the legacy was secure, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally home. The local news did a small story on the donation, praising the incredible generosity of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. They interviewed the charity's director, who spoke with tears in her eyes about the gift that would allow so many families to have one last, beautiful trip together. I cut the article out of the newspaper and placed it in my old file, on top of all the documents detailing David's crimes. This was the final entry in the audit. The books were, at long last, truly balanced. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar, but I knew instantly who it was from. It was the first direct communication from my brother in over 2 years. My hands trembled as I opened it. The letter was short. "Caroline," it began, "I saw the story in the news about the lake house. My first reaction was anger. That was supposed to be my legacy. But then I saw the pictures of the families the charity helps. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something other than self-pity. I felt shame, a deep, profound shame for the man I became. I know that sorry is a meaningless word after what I did to you. I don't expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that what you did, not just exposing me, but what happened after, it has, in some small way, shown me what it means to build something instead of just taking. I am trying to be a better man. I fail most days. But I am trying. David." I folded the letter and walked out onto my porch. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden glow over the neighborhood. My home was safe. My community was healed. And a house built with stolen money was now a haven for families in their time of greatest need. My revenge had been a cold, hard, and necessary thing. But in the end, it had resulted in an act of grace so profound that it had managed to do the one thing I never thought possible. It had saved more than just my home. It had, perhaps, in the smallest of ways, started to save my brother too. It was a lesson that sometimes the only way to truly fix what is broken is to build something beautiful in its place. And now I have to ask you, and I'm truly curious to know, when you discovered the full extent of my brother's crimes, what do you think his punishment should be? Did I go too far? Or not far enough? Share your honest opinion in the comments below. I read everyone. If you believe that accountability is the first step to redemption, and you enjoyed seeing this story unfold, please do me a favor and leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you're the first to know when the next story of justice is served. And don't go anywhere. I've placed 2 of our community's most shocking stories of family betrayal right here on the screen. I promise you won't see the endings coming. Click on one of them and I'll see you there.